Hello everyone, I'm Modeng. Today, we'll discuss the stylized scene creation process. The realistic process is similar. This example showcases the workflow of Tang, our 2023 student competition winner, formerly an architect. Let's summarize Modeng's stylized class workflow based on this process. First, we select the source image and gather relevant references. Several key aspects guide image selection. It should closely align with the course's concepts. This helps beginners and those with less experience effectively apply what they've learned. This ensures better application of learned content to your projects. Significant deviations from the course material hinder achieving the desired outcome. This is crucial. This is critical. Second, clearly define shapes and materials. First, assess the source image's completion level. Highly conceptual images require more secondary creation, making them harder to manage. This makes them difficult to control. This image, however, boasts high detail and completion. Therefore, it's a suitable choice. Third, ensure harmonious color palettes. Let's examine its color scheme and coordination. If it's too ornate or too simple, it won't achieve the desired effect. If the original painting isn't of sufficient quality, creating it yourself will be quite difficult. Fourthly, a background setting would be beneficial. Find relevant material and environmental references for the building. A complete environment. An original painting with its environment is ideal. Otherwise, with only the building, you'll need to find relevant references. As discussed in the course, how to find references. For example, this original painting is quite complete. If incomplete, find similar settings, a matching worldview. An architectural style from games or films, or even photography. We need a basis, including material references. These material references provide better detail during production and inform the final presentation. Only with accurate references will later production be smoother. It's better to have a clearer objective. This reference is primarily for your own use. The second step is whiteboxing. I suggest everyone use Unreal Engine's whiteboxing tools. Many students jump straight into 3D modeling. Some create fairly complete models, finishing the white models before importing them into the engine. This increases the risk. You can't be sure of the actual in-engine performance and the scale relationship between characters. Or the spatial relationships. You need to verify this in the engine. This is crucial. Therefore, I recommend doing this step, using the engine's whiteboxing tools. However, there's something to keep in mind. The level of detail in the whitebox is crucial. I've noticed many students spend too much time on whiteboxing. Sometimes several weeks. That's not right. Whiteboxing should take at most a day. Usually, an hour or two is sufficient. If you spend too long on it, that's putting the cart before the horse. It didn't meet our expectations. Everyone, please refer to this time. Just force yourself to spend one day at most on it. If you still can't finish it in a day, your method might be the problem. Okay, let's review the course and live stream again, then adjust and verify the key points. Let's look at modeling accuracy. First, the model needs to be accurate. The composition should emphasize the visual center. Prioritize restoring the original composition. If the original composition is good, restore it. We'll restore it in this step. We can get creative later. But this step, restoring the original, must come first. Third, the proportions between buildings and objects. We need to address this. We build a white box in the engine, primarily for positioning. Then, import this white box into 3D software to create a more refined white model. Determining building proportions is crucial within the white box. Okay, fourth, restoring lens perspective. Many students struggle with this from the start, finding it hard to get it right. We might make a separate video on this later. We've covered this in many previous courses. Restoring lens perspective means restoring the original perspective. Why restore this? To better compare its proportions and structure. Because the original reference is the basis of our production. We build based on this reference. So we restore the camera perspective. Step 5. Terrain and environment base building. If the terrain is complete in the original, simply build based on that area. Otherwise, our first step is to find relevant environmental references. With those references, you can combine them to build the environment. Okay, next is step 3. White model creation. Import the white box into 3D software and create a detailed white model. During creation, note. First, ensure structural accuracy. Second, the workflow must facilitate low poly conversion. Don't make the white model overly high poly. Some students from the film industry might not realize this is for a game. Low poly models have specific polygon count limits, so they might start by making a high poly model, or adding many beveled edges. This makes it harder to create the final low poly model. So pay attention to this. Our white model can have a slightly higher poly count. Poly count isn't a major concern. We prioritize speed. Going straight to the final low poly model is fine. Skip the white model step. I create the final low poly model directly for the game. That's fine too. Okay? It's mainly to quickly verify the model structure. Making a white model first, then reducing it to a low poly model, is easier and faster. It's easier to manage the shape and make modifications. Just do it according to your own preference. Third, match the original colors. Many students don't match the original colors. The colors are messy and inaccurate. The image looks cluttered, making it hard to compare it to the original. That's the problem. This step is important. So match the original colors. The fourth key point. Basic terrain materials. Route drawing. This adds basic materials. The terrain material defines the road. This is for self-verification. In a project team, when developing a complete project, this step lets the whole team playtest the game. Checking if the scene matches our design and expectations, and collecting feedback. Then we make further modifications. Step 4. Texture planning. Many students have questions about this. Texture planning, key considerations. Prioritize 4-way tileable and 2-way tileable/trimmable textures for better versatility. Prioritize 4-way and 2-way tileable textures. This is crucial. For example, with raw materials, like the stone section below. Many students create textures like this. The top half is wall, the bottom is stone. This is not recommended. It combines two materials. It's hard to manage. Plus, its reusability is very low. Because it only reuses half. It can't be used full screen. Unlike seamless tiling, allowing for more flexible UV usage. Because it can extend beyond the seam. If it's just part of a texture, extending beyond the seam is difficult. Okay, keep this in mind. Prioritize seamless tiling whenever possible. Create seamless or half-seamless tiles first. Half-seamless tiling, the trim sheet texture from our course. Second, for half-seamless tiling, plan the aspect ratio carefully. We covered this aspect ratio in the course. How many different aspect ratios you actually use? Plan accordingly. Third, for individually sculpted objects. No planning is needed, this is crucial. A common student question. And a frequent mistake. Let me elaborate. We have two main workflows. One process involves creating repetitive textures, like two-way and four-way continuous patterns. Another is the object process. Objects can't extend beyond the seam line, their UVs must be one-to-one. These two processes differ. When creating objects, texture planning isn't necessary. Why? Because we create low-poly models, splitting UVs. UV distribution is considered during this split. That step waits until the high-poly model is complete. We create the low-poly model, split the UVs, and then proceed. Doing this step initially is wasteful. It's unnecessary. Also, for objects, we don't need to combine multiple objects into a single texture. It's acceptable for similar objects, like candles. If you've modeled various candle shapes, combining them into one texture is fine. But for candles, windows, doors, and flags, if you've modeled all of them, combining them into one texture is unnecessary. Because this will also waste performance. We covered this in the course. Fourth, plan your texture ratios carefully. Consider our brick texture repetition rate. How many times it's repeated needs planning. As discussed in the course, plan based on the pixel to meter ratio. For example, 2 meters equal 124 pixels. Plan texture repetition based on the actual ratio. Okay. Fifth, let's look at the key points of rough texturing. First, is your model a game-ready low-poly model? If it's already a game-ready low-poly model, you can directly use a more formal UV and apply the texture. If it's just a high-poly white model that hasn't been reduced and isn't the final low-poly model yet, then you don't need to spend much time UV unwrapping at this stage. You'll need to reduce it later anyway. You'll be turning the high-poly model into a low-poly model later. So don't waste time on this step. Use your best judgment. Second, plan the 4-way and 2-way continuous sections using the texture map. Texture first, then UV unwrap. This follows the texture planning from the previous step. After planning the texture map or doing a rough texture, we unwrap the UV. Rough texturing works like this. You can edit this image in Photoshop, or use Photoshop to edit it, or use Substance Designer. With SD, we create basic texture maps, primarily to check the UV and initial texture results, and the texture ratio. Fourth, texture color and ratio are crucial. Many students don't match the original colors during this step. This leads to suboptimal results. So, restore the texture color and ratio here. Fifth, determine texture density. I covered this in the course. If you have many questions, we'll make a separate video. Sixth, key asset verification points. SD materials must be tested and adjusted in the engine. After creating it in SD, don't dwell on the SD effect. Verify it in the 8-core rendering. You must use the engine, because the engine's rendering differs from the SD display. Why the difference? It's because they use different engines, with different lighting environments and settings. So use the engine as the standard, frequently verifying the final result. Second, maintain consistent detail in object creation. Local details should support the overall look. Don't get bogged down in details during creation. Don't spend too long on any single point. Efficiency is crucial in our workflow. So focus on the overall progress, with details supporting the whole. Third, for vegetation, consider volume, shape, silhouette, and color. Shape and silhouette are key when modeling vegetation. For example, tree silhouettes are important, as is color. Always compare your work to reference images and source material. Fourth point, pay attention to the tonal range of the textures, avoid excessive contrast. This is crucial. Let's look at an example. This student had this issue in this step. We addressed this during the live stream. For example, the contrast between wood and walls is very strong. He adjusted this in later works. This is crucial. Let me illustrate. For example, if you open a scene and view it in no lighting mode, you'll see the difference in texture brightness. Let's open a scene, for example, this one. We can verify the contrast using the base color. We can use no light mode. Then check the brightness, avoid excessive contrast. Excessive contrast creates strong highlights and shadows. The contrast becomes very strong. For instance, copper is in the shadows. And even within the shadows, the contrast shouldn't be excessive. This also needs manual adjustment. Bright areas shouldn't be too bright, and dark areas shouldn't be too dark. Okay, fifthly, don't get bogged down in local details, focus on the overall effect. As I mentioned in point 4, efficiency is crucial for this project. Focus on the overall effect. Step 7. Sky, lighting, environment. We need to add a sky sphere here. Adjust the lighting and the surrounding level art assets and environment. This is key. First, pay attention to the silhouette and material consistency in cloud distribution. Some students choose inconsistent materials, using the same clouds and environment, but with different material styles, resulting in a jarring, patchwork look. Also, pay attention to resolution. Some students use inconsistent resolutions, again creating a strong patchwork effect. This needs to be addressed. Second, pay attention to the light ratio and the contrast between daylight and backlight. Let's look back at the previous step. The light ratio is quite disharmonious, right? As I said, the dark areas that are too dark or too bright still have some brightness. The strong contrast everywhere prevents a cohesive overall effect, nor does it highlight its visual center. We weakened the strong contrasts in this step. Many intermediate transitional tones and elements were added. Rich picture effect. Some areas need fill light. Some backlighting doesn't achieve the ideal effect. Fill light should be added, and the basic colors adjusted as previously mentioned. Avoid overly strong contrast. The surrounding environment's level art is rich. The picture effect in this step is basically the materials, objects, and lighting. Your level art and surrounding environment should also adjust to match the overall look. Pay attention to the overall picture effect. The 8th step completes the process. This involves adjusting the front to back layering and the emphasis. In step 7, a foreground was missing. Adding one highlights the spatial relationships and enhances the overall composition, making the main subject stand out more, creating a greater sense of a magical forest. The 2nd step emphasizes the relationship between black, white, and gray. Remember this point. There's a black, white, and gray relationship here. This provides a good method for analysis. Let's convert it to grayscale and take a look. Yes, in grayscale, we can see. For example, let's compare the final grayscale effect with this effect. Comparing this step. Black, white, and gray means there's no gradual transition. And the contrast is stronger. The black, white, and gray relationships will be much better later on. Also, overall, the foreground and background are darker, while the middle is brighter and well lit. This will highlight the central visual focus. Let's convert everything to black and white and assess the overall visual effect. Okay, step 4, adding special effects and dynamic elements, makes the image more vibrant. We've added fireflies, lights, falling leaves, and plant animations. If there are birds, we can add a wind effect. This brings the image to life. For the final output, we have a dedicated course. So please follow the course materials and documentation. Okay, we've covered the 8 steps in this stylized production process. Now let's look at this student's work and what we can learn from it. There are valuable lessons here. I made some minor adjustments in class, using Photoshop. I refined the composition and surrounding elements. The students saved these changes. I also provided feedback during the live stream. The student added their own feedback and reflections. All this is documented. If we treat each week as a milestone, we see progress each week. There are updates every week. These learning habits are worth noting. Learn from our feedback. Record it and check your progress the next week. Did you make the necessary changes? Consistent iteration is key. Efficient iteration leads to a better final product. Okay, that's all for this lesson.